And thank you. So from now on, we'll be recording this. We do have a keynote where we, Inigo and I, we are both very happy and glad that he was willing to join us in this event. Dr. Wilfried Bolewski is currently working as a professor of of diplomacy and international law at the American Graduate School in Paris. However, he's not only an academic, he moved over the past number of years more into academia, back to academia, because he has a rich career in diplomacy. And perhaps I think he has the richest career in diplomacy among all of us who will be participating. And he will share more about that with you once he will introduce himself and start his keynote. But we're very happy. I can only say I'm tremendously delighted that he was willing to join in and say yes from Paris, which makes it even more interesting that he is our keynote today. Dr. Wilfried Bolewski, the floor is yours. Good morning.
Good morning, Inigo, friends. Thank you for the opportunity to offer you some orientation knowledge for public-private management in turbulent times. In her closing lecture at the Collège de France in 2011, the French philosopher jurist Mireille Delmas-Marty characterized the leading themes of future governance as resilience, responsibility, and anticipation. Indeed, in unprecedented times, the collective future cannot be perceived any longer as a reliably certain continuance of the past and the present, since past does not always offer the appropriate guidance about what we should be doing. Our knowledge management for time-bounded decision-making and shifting realities does not only rely on the conventional wisdom of analytical, arithmetic, linear modeling, what I call the algorithms of oppression, replicating past-oriented, accumulated certainties, patterns, paradigms, theories, and attitudes. It should rather question old and often flawed assumptions by including humans' anticipating capacities such as imagination, flexibility, and agility to pierce the veil of ignorance and to fill the vacuum of information about the unknown and the unknowable future events. This trademark of leadership in unsettling times of fundamental uncertainty will be the integration of traditional factual experience and orientation knowledge with the intellectual and moral virtues as essential of practical wisdom and foresight. Such a cognitive process of decision-making and innovative action will be based on future-oriented creativity and psychological intuition. The change of mindset for alternative thinking will lead us to an overarching sense of purpose and perspective of the management of expectations and assumptions for an imagined future. Where nothing is certain anymore, the unpredictable and improbable becomes possible, and the impossible reveals itself to be a possible certainty. Various black swans could impose new normalcies against the denial of the obvious. In order to perform and function of governing the unknowable, leaders will have to imagine a state-of-the-art everyday reality, whenever the status quo is untenable. Learning to live with systemic uncertainty. Since this cannot be fully rationalized, emotional intelligence and empathy are needed to avoid reality shock. In the 21st century, our universal community of fate with a shared destination is characterized by grand challenges and global fragilities, such as economic volatility and societal upheaval. These destabilizing turbulences reveal a paradigmatic fracturing of political and social orders and their dysfunctional multilateral organizations towards an era of fragmented and disintegrated international disorder. Exogenous events and disruptive developments like pandemics, market crisis, climate change-induced natural disasters, water and food scarcity, and cyber attacks require coordinated and collaborative efforts to engage in tackling these epochal intersocietal threats and ruptures with boldness inspired by principled pragmatism. These violent and recurrent emergencies in complex systems of changing environments necessitate an alternative culture of extreme risk sharing, including imaginative scenarios, constellations, and assessments of their probability. Consequently, the nature of international relations is shifting from state management to intersocial, intersocietal, and transversal governance. But in our interdependent world, one can assume that the critical capacity of human ingenuity will eventually secure that every global challenge will find its sustainable solution on the basis of cooperative sovereignty and transnational solidarity. Today, the responsibilities for navigating and influencing the dynamics of internal and external multiplex turbulences are shared in a society at large perspective by all actors in the public and private spheres. This phenomenon is more and more important for international business managers to consider geopolitics as relevant to their activities, to integrate political risk analysis into their business decisions, aligning market strategy with non-market public concerns. Interacting within shifting geopolitical realities through collaboration with government in a dialectical, not vertical process is benefiting eventually both the wider common good of societies and the bottom line of long-term shareholder values. The future role of business in society should be mindful of the increased focus on environmental, social, and governance concerns. This management approach could open a leadership path for an emergent, people-oriented economy, serving also legitimate societal needs, including the perception of their general relevance, fairness, and social usefulness, including the perception, as I said, the usefulness, instead of selective prestige and privileged comfort. Within the context of what is called economics of mutuality, economics for humans, or economy for life, it acknowledges the pro-social behavioral imprint of business in developing profitable and sustainable solutions for shared societal problems instead of earning profits at the expense of some people and the environment. That is the economics of more. Economics is about people who are not emotionless, hyper-rational calculating machines. Economists sometimes wish they were. Transnational companies aiming for competitive edge need to include the potential impact of the widening array of global political actors. The growing relationship between business and its external stakeholders also emphasizes the urgency for diplomatic skills and sheds new light on the virtues of diplomacy. Now let me turn to the virtues of diplomacy as a societal concept. International society is in demand of content-sensitive orientation knowledge to reassess, adjust, and accommodate diplomacy's essentials, meaning human factor interdependency and interactions, what is called the diplomacy for good, to new expectations of the public sphere. This requires an opening through reflexive consciousness towards the values and culture of diplomatic engagement and negotiations. Decision makers should learn to think and act responsibly through the middle of conflictual situations towards compromise, thus managing politics into the future through diplomacy. At the tipping point, such a paradigm shift as governmentality will create a diplomatic watershed moment in the management process for public-private partnering, aiming at compromise and consensus building as major accomplishments. Especially in times of crisis, cooperation is needed to avoid diplomatic divide between state, government, and the corporate world. Reappraising its moral civilizing virtues, a socially embodied diplomacy, not tied solely to the state, could become a form of third culture, a societal diplomacy with and through human relational practices. This encounter with the self and other can even lead to a process of diplomatic social bonding among actors. Such a form of everyday diplomacy applies also to the ways individuals and communities, such as transnational companies, as well as NGOs, engage with and influence decisions about world affairs. This nascent knowledge area, turning into an innovative management practice, has developed over the last decades, dealing with geopolitical and non-commercial risks in international relations. By sharing social, societal responsibilities among government and business. And we all know this concept is called corporate diplomacy for some or business diplomacy for others. While both terms, corporate diplomacy and business diplomacy, have been employed, defined, and distinguished, especially by HOOP, the general accepted usage seems to move towards corporate diplomacy, be it as it may. I will now turn to corporate diplomacy as a government compass for multiplex turbulences. Today's societal purpose of international management is not merely business, and business is not an end in itself, but its social impact should also serve common good purpose. Changing communities' expectations demand today that future managers in leadership positions, such as the audience, will have to project themselves differently, relinquishing certain mainstream beliefs of unlimited economic growth and human perfectibility, while responding and reacting to social and environmental challenges as problem solvers. The aim is to provide socially inclusive growth, as well as securing the resilience, general acceptance, and social credit of corporations. In light of state failures, especially in dysfunctional societies with incapable or unwilling governments, corporations share the important role of generating and diffusing innovations that contribute to sustainable development. Thus, management engagement in social problems of a more inclusive society becomes an alternative logic, a new overarching sense of practical purpose, and a moral imperative for business leaders. This targeted form of perceived values and identity-driven marketing will shape the future asset of an undivided corporate integrity. More and more corporate leaders are already acknowledging that environmental and social governance issues are important for their business interests. This extended purpose of environmental social governance is also fostering a long-term strategy perspective in times of fundamental uncertainties. While corporations are likely to respond first to the business case normally, some are at the same time embracing the ethical values case for changing corporate behavior to profit within public purpose of an economy for life and to restraint for the sake of societal usefulness. With principled action in response to public expectations, corporations can also create and sustain value as well as societal worth. Confronted with social and environmental demands, international business enterprises seen as private public entities are requested to get involved in issues of public concern by providing public goods and co-creating more just and peaceful coexisting societies. International diplomacy provides the tools for corporate conflict management. In tackling grand challenges, corporations are becoming diplomatic co-actors in the trade of diplomacy, in acquiring access to the diplomatic arena. Thus, multinational corporations are to be acknowledged as actors and as objects in diplomatic processes and international affairs. Operating in an increasingly complex and volatile environment, transnational companies should merge their business knowledge with the diplomatic knowledge in order to define zones where these two could overlap and cross-fertilize, experiencing the rising importance of the diplomatic mindset and practices as relational communication management into the future. To navigate the ship of business through these challenges, it is imperative that global corporations integrate corporate diplomacy as governance compass into their strategic planning to successfully match the liability that come with operating in foreign markets. When corporate diplomacy activities are aiming at economically as well as socially sustainable business solutions, they can at the same time improve the public perception of companies' legitimacy in society, what is called the social credit, by practicing political influence and filling government gaps. This perceived legitimacy and trust capital will also accredit them as political actors and civil society representatives. In order to strengthen their place in society, they should treat social shortcomings as opportunity, connecting business success with social transformation by harmonizing or at least reconciling economical with social goals. Transnational corporations can profit from traditional state diplomacy in order to create an enabling business environment to anticipate and avoid costly conflicts if they practice corporate diplomacy as a dialectical decision-making process and key concept of trusted and coordinated collaboration in a national and international level with government and local host communities. In this context, Kirsten Morgensen recognized the following diplomatic procedures: engaging in dialogues with the local publics in host communities, building long-term relationships, sharing information, recognizing others' values, mediating different interests, and shaping compromises with local civil society representatives. In my own experience, the essence of diplomatic practice consists of managing situational and contextual ambivalence and harmonizing divergent interests and expectations within a holistic approach of emotional and social intercultural intelligence. Moreover, corporate diplomacy provides the soft power for non-state diplomatic actors, multinational NGOs, and even smart cities to increase their activities and follow their own agenda in the international arena, as well as to engage in providing solutions to global problems such as climate change. As polycentric globalization, which is social by nature, and geopolitical and economical in function, forces cooperation to take on more diplomatic missions, governments themselves tend to adopt a more corporate, business-focused approach in opening up markets to domestic industries, using corporate networks and their proactive innovation, intuition, flexibility, and bargaining tactics to become more economically competitive. The state market nexus and interdependence, with its revitalizing diplomacy through greater coordination between state and non-state actors, is best exemplified by the cooperative approach to the geo-economic implementation of sanctions policy. This symbiotic relationship between corporate and government actors creates a synergy between the private and public spheres through a privatized diplomacy, within the further extension into a triangular pattern of relations between public, private, and civic entities. This privatization could pave the way for reshaping their operating environment into a new social and even moral contract. Now, I'm turning to the recent example of corporate diplomacy implementation, COVID-19 pandemic. A few short comments. In the global coronavirus pandemic, transnational companies are taking up the role of public utilities with the supply of medical equipment, substituting for or collaborating with government leadership, thus guiding a transition into individual and societal behaviors towards a triple solidarity of government, business, and science. Global catastrophes like pandemics demonstrate the urgency for public-private partnerships in solidarity between government and business for a human-centered security, to provide future financial, economic, and social resilience in times of international catastrophes. Government can also profit from corporate experience and innovation in anticipatory risk assessment, including banks and insurances. And business will appreciate, in the last resort, the cover from government intervention and security. In an open society, they can best face exceptional tasks with new forms of cooperation. One lesson in my mind of COVID-19 capitalism, moving from crisis to opportunity while accelerating societal trends, is that big business needs big governments, and vice versa, to solve such enormous problems with a sense of shared responsibilities. Government exercises its power to guide the economy with regard to public health by funding for basic research, patent enforcement, safety regulations, distribution and dispensation of vaccines, and acts as the ultimate absorber of society-wide risks, so that business can develop its commercial ability to turn research ideas into marketable products. My conclusions. In a post-global era, polycentric governance needs an appropriate compass for the business-government nexus. In an increasingly horizontal society and an open government partnership, over the past decade, the conceptual breakthrough of corporate diplomacy has formed a base of innovation diplomacy and gained considerable traction in academia as well as business practice, providing strategic communication management tool into the future, which is now called corporate statecraft. This qualitative leap towards a change of governmentality signifies a corporate commitment to diplomatic efforts for symbiotic and coordinated cooperation between business and government. With regard to major societal challenges in our universal community of fate, a solidary public-private partnership on the basis of public spirit and diplomatic principles, values, and participatory strategies could turn into a form of whole of society governance through privatized diplomacy. Monumental crises, such as the current global pandemics, are testing the traditional orthodoxy of liberal capitalism and can create the political space to transform the overarching sense of practical purpose and the dominant logic, as well as the nature of the economy's role in society. In a cum-COVID world, the quest for the status quo ante cannot be the compass. And capitalism will best survive with the inclusion of transnational solidarity, empathy, and practical duty for societal due diligence and humanist care. Public expectations to recognize and to tackle shifting realities demand from purpose-driven management the courage for an innovative mentality and collaborative approach towards resilient solutions for the common good. Corporate diplomacy as a promising business tool is designing the course correction for what Kirsten Mogensen values as, quote, corporate legitimate diamond, end of quote, or Ron Aquila perceive as, quote, a new global realm of the mind, end of quote. For smart social management to be relevant in a new normal and to sustain performance in the coming decades, radical reimagination and boldness inspired by principle of pragmatism are in demand. Extraordinary paradigm shifts for forward thinking and acting are not only necessary, but possible. Yet actual progress does not happen automatically. It requires creative and determined leadership to nudge it along towards solving our health, social, environment, and economic problems. This is the time for multi-actor networked responsibility to attach purpose-driven conditions to emergency policies and to promote a change of culture towards a multi-stakeholder mindset for a new global political and social economy. From Homo economicus to Homo societatis, which could mean the end of economy we used to practice. Corporate diplomacy as a topical learning could serve as a landmark for the fundamental shift in corporate purpose, including the mindfulness for societal concerns and the common social good, leading to the evolution of corporate governance towards a stakeholder capitalism. These systemic changes of collective purpose will engage a state of mind that will be able to creatively manage evolving realities. The perspective of an era of heightened and enduring risks imposes a sense of shared responsibilities among all parts of society. Eventually, human agency will prevail over business as usual. Thank you. I expect your comments and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Walewski, for
Will, just shortly, Will.
For a very rich and very thoughtful and keynote. You really dropped the first, one could say you fantastically addressed the theme of the conference, And I think there is a lot of food for thought that needs further elaboration. I'm looking at Inigo as well. I mean, we could open the floor for questions and from the audience. And I mean, Inigo, the floor is yours, but let me then at least now say, like, who's willing to drop a first question? Feel free to take the floor.
I've got lots of things, but meanwhile, I'm going to say thank you to Will, right?
Yes.
And thanks very much. That was full of issues to talk about, which are very innovative in the sense of bringing us closer to the reality that we live and the challenges that we have to tackle these days, right? So I don't know if anyone wants to be the first one. If not, I can just maybe drop one question, and meanwhile people can I gotta break the ice, and somebody will and my question would be connected with your conclusions, right?
Yes.
When you talked about multi-actorness and multi-stakeholders, right? As you know, in the Basque Country, due to the Spanish political system, there is a shared governance in between the central government and the different regions, right? And it's highly decentralized, right? So one thing we are researching very much on these days is the role of regional governments, right? Which traditionally have been attached to local politics in terms of basic needs of people, and transportation, health, education, etc., right? But these are the topics that now we have to deal with, right? And at a global level. So my question is, non-state governments like regional governments in Spain, even local governments in many parts of the world where cities are large, right? How can they really interact on all this transformation that I loved, from the Homo economicus to the Homo societatis, right?
Thank you very much. Crucial. The idea behind your question is the extension of diplomatic virtues and diplomatic practice and of business or corporate diplomacy, not only to the level of state. We have gone to non-state actors, but we're now refining the realm of non-state actors, as you said, to NGOs, corporations, regions, and cities. Why are we extending them to these new actors? Because the topics are relevant to all of them. Take climate change. This is not a matter of state. This is not a matter only of region, but it's a matter of state as well as region, as well as city, as well as community. In other words, we have to see the government's perspective with diplomacy, as I would prefer, more in a sense of topical concern. And that brings us into the next question of the extended community of actors. How would they act, and how can they best act? I think there we can learn a lot from their local area and their local networking. They have in themselves, as far as I know, cities, for example, smart cities, global cities, have a whole network of themselves dealing with migrants, climate change, transport, security, cyber attack, and so on. These are existing networks that can be used and that can be made functional and made interconnected with state spheres. One should not see it as a world apart, but a new entries from the local level, regions and cities, into the so far closed circle of diplomatic and international relations. We are becoming aware that diplomacy is acting in and around and with people's concerns, and not just with state representation. And even worse, state interests, national interests. National interest is at the ground level and starting at the ground level. So I would say returning the perspective from the exclusive sphere of state diplomacy to the level of practical concern. And their networking plays a great role. Does that answer some of your questions?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question. May I?
Certainly. With great
Thank
pleasure.
you so much. I'm João Taborda. I'm based in Portugal. I work for a multinational manufacturing airplanes and systems, Embraer. So we have some customers in Spain and also in the Netherlands. So the question, first of all, thank you for your thoughts. In line with the Inigo's question, when you talk about the extended community of actors,
yes.
How do you see, with all the speed up in things, that with all the things which are speeding up because of the pandemic and things that sectors and areas accelerating, we see banks doing things after 5 months that they were thinking about doing after 10 years. So many of the things are not new, and they're just accelerating what was already there. How do you see, when we talk about the extended community of actors, traditionally, when we think about business diplomacy, you think about companies like ours. We were one of the biggest exporters of Brazil. So we, as a multinational, we are always together with the Brazilian government. And how do you see now smaller companies being relevant actors? I mean, SMEs, thinking about the Basque Country, for instance, clusters of SMEs. How do you see these type of actors now being more or less present in what we have ahead?
Well, very pertinent and practical. As I see the diplomacy, from my point of view, dribbling down through society, through regional, city, large companies, small companies, I think the linkage is to unite on whatever level they practice first. You call it what small actors, SMEs. I know in all countries, they have their associations, association of small and middle-sized companies. I think this is where these associations come into play. Linkages, also geographical linkages. Imagine your SME, the one you were concerned about, is situated near a larger city. They could easily create a link into these larger cities, regions. In other words, the perspective should be, who else is concerned? I'm now speaking as a small actor, SME, put myself into the mindset. That's crucial for diplomacy, putting yourself into the mindset of the other. If I am a small SME, where are those that are thinking likewise, that have similar problems in my country or in other countries, and how can we unite? In other words, that's where technology comes into play. Technology now allows us to make linkages, as we have just experiences today, without limits. Geography is no more limit. But on the other hand, the community of concern is growing. And technology makes it possible to work on, to influence, to use our influence on issues of common concern. So the awareness, the climate change again, that we are somehow concerned about similar problems everywhere, is a point of linkage, and we should use this. Even small enterprises should use it, and not be afraid somehow this is a sphere above our authority, our influence, and our concern. We should not. We should very well. All of them should very well linked to the concerns. Again, concern is the key.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
We at the multinational, we think that business diplomacy is a monopoly of multinationals, and that is less and less. And we should partner, and that aspect of absence of geographical boundaries and frontiers is very interesting. Thank you so much for your answer.
I'm not, in giving this answer, I'm not arguing against one towards the other. I am being more extensive and inclusive at the same way. Now, ideally, let me take your company, not knowing your company. They should have a CEO, and next to the CEO should be sitting somebody experienced in diplomacy, be it in an academic way, be it in a practical way, to advise what diplomatic practices can be used and how they can be used. And if you like, I can give you the practical elements of diplomacy that should be applied by business. And maybe that's the opportunity to do so. If there's no other urgent question, I would like to follow up on this one. Is that agreeable to all others? I would give you 5 essential elements of the practice of diplomacy that can be used and should be used by SMEs as well as big corporations. First of all, it's a term that you may not be familiar with, but it will make sense of you easy, is the word multilog. Now, some of us, I'm not the only one, have created it, beyond dialogue. In other words, already the idea of not only that you are dialoguing with one person, concentrating on one person, being concerned about her concern, but to widen your view to what other people in person-to-person contact, face-to-face conversations, networking, proactive engagement are contributing or could contributing to the solution of specific problems. Point number 2, emotional cognition and dynamics, what I call the perception management, not the management of figures, perception management. Empathy, sensitivity for the other, discretion and humility. Now, you might say these are big words. Let me go through them and put them into practical context. Emotional cognitions. Psychologists have taught us or are teaching us, and I'm taking some of their wisdom, that a human being actually perceives events through the emotional sphere and not beware through the rational sphere. That's a big fallacy of the past. I will explain. Emotional, we take in events and put them into categories of good, bad, known, unknown. And then we analyze them, again, emotionally analyze them. What is my interest? How can I approach a solution? What do I want to happen? What do I don't want to happen? Pros and cons. And then again, emotional, perceptive. Through the year, you're emotional, perceptive. You go through the next stage of solutions. And you think of solutions that is emotionally, again, I insist, acceptable to you. And once you have, so to speak, your emotional interest, concern, solution, you rationalize it. You promote it to the public. And the best way to promoting to the public, at least in the past, was to rationalize it. It is necessary. It is rational. It is in the interest. And then you use big words. Democracy. and so on. Behind all these big words are emotional positioning and perception. And I've gone through this process on two levels. First of all, as a lawyer, you use these conceptual themes. And then later on in diplomatic practice, I have learned that behind all these useful terms is hiding an emotional perception. Even in diplomacy, I've seen them huddling, discussing topics on a day-to-day level. What is governing their practice is the emotional sphere. They are looking for emotional contact. Let me stop here because I have to go through three others, and maybe you have the questions. The third point would be the practice of diplomacy, dealing with uncertainties through ethical principled pragmatism, the culture and logic of compromise and consensus. Well, I think you're most familiar with this one. I'll skip it in explanation. The fourth one is more disputable: mutual restraint for the sake of harmonization and sustainability as ideal modes of governance and source of legitimacy. Mind you, the sustainable of any solution lies in the fact that it is accepted not only by me, but by others, and especially your opponents, who have other interests, other concerns. Mutual restraint, something we have to practice in diplomacy, but something which is not the number one principle of business. Business is win, at best win-win, but the mutual restraint to make the win-win possible is still an idea not widely known and practiced. Fifth and last, the awareness of the context of global issues. In other words, putting issues into context. Climate change is not a matter of climate change. It's a matter of social society, even economics, we all know. In other words, the global context of issues with their contrasting economic, ecological, cultural, and social dimensions. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Both Stelios, I think you wanted to make a question, maybe?
Yes, yes, I did. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Walewski. It was very, very interesting, all this presentation. Thank you for making it and for all these comments. One thing that I would think, that I would like to ask that follows from the 5 points that you just made, is one of the things that is important before you start engaging in this process is convincing the other party that there is a need for this. And this also goes to convincing students or showing to students that diplomacy has value, because unfortunately, quite often you don't see the value of diplomacy when it works. You see it when it fails. So that is an issue that quite often, you know, how would you suggest making that point or bringing that about, that we need to do this before we face a real catastrophe, and then we are both convinced we need it, but it's too late, we had the catastrophe. So, you know.
You really hit the nail on the head. It is the general ignorance of the virtues of diplomacy, I must say, which is at stake. We have learned to consider diplomacy something as a matter of state. Diplomacy is a matter of mindset. And I've defined it also as a matter of mindset. And if you put yourself into the mindset of empathy, knowing the other before you want to impose yourself, that's the secret of negotiation. The secret of negotiation is not making up my positioning for coming to a deal. No. The best way of negotiating is, I know what I want. I know what I feel. let's put this aside. Look into the others. Brexit. They're still at it. This very moment.
Yeah,
Looking at others' interest and the limits of the others' compromise possibilities, where matters of identity come in the others' thinking. That's the limit. You can hardly touch and change and negotiate matters of identity. As a matter of fact, presently, Britain talks about sovereignty. No. What they are concerned about is identity. They see their identity at stake. Now, that's a matter of last resort. One should not and cannot change. Identity is not negotiable. Identity is to be accepted under the cover of sovereignty. My point was, starting point of your answer is, the values of diplomacy have to be re-evaluated, have to communicate it. And I think there's a large sphere of doing so in the academic sphere. And that's what you and we are doing through the instrument of corporate diplomacy, that we are promoting the sense of diplomacy. Let me read again my definition. It is very well covered, but I think it needs to be savored again, or I offer it again. The essence of diplomatic practice consists of managing situational and contextual ambivalence. In other words, accepting the other and his ambivalence, listening to it, and harmonizing, not imposing, harmonizing divergent interests and expectations with a holistic approach of emotional, I did talk about emotional perception, social and intercultural intelligence. Now, what all does it leave out? The mathematics, the give and take. It's all secondary. Take in these concepts of values and emotional concerns, and the rest, how much fishing one or the other will get, will fall into place. What if the two negotiators now at the top would be concerned about the future of the EU as a major emotional concern? If that is their background, the negotiations about fishing could find a solution under the pressure of a larger problem looming. I'll close the parenthesis because I'm not the negotiator, but I'm giving you practical insights of what negotiating can, within the sense of diplomacy, can provide.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So in a sense, what you're saying is we're managing emotions, but we're managing them through numbers, basically.
Yes.
We're pretending we're doing numbers, but we're managing emotions.
That's the wrong approach.
Yeah.
Let's leave your numbers, my numbers, the others' numbers aside for a moment, and look into background concerns. And there you will have an emotional perception of background concerns rather than numbers. Certainly a revolution, because everybody is dealing with numbers. But that's why they get into a sens unique, into a backlog. No, there's a road that doesn't have no end.
Way street.
That's why you get into dead end. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think yeah, I could drop one more question myself, but if is there anybody else who wishes to go for and dare to go for one more question until we move on to our next session? And I'm looking at my chat. I'm trying to see. And otherwise, Dr. Bolevsky, we can leave it until the afternoon, because then we've got our panel session, where you happily agreed. Thank you very much for that as well, to be one of the members of the panel. And some of the issues that you addressed in your keynote and what you addressed now in your answers to responses to questions, I think are also a part of some of the statements that we'll be discussing. So this is really interesting, and you really put, as I dared at least, to drop already a few quotes of the day. Maybe you've got your chat open as well, but I liked the diplomacy is a matter of mindset as maybe the quote of the day, but maybe we'll get some new ones. So let's start some sort of, whether we get the better ones. And the other one, Brexit is not about sovereignty, but about identity, which I like very much as well. But let everybody feel free to drop and make suggestions for quotes of the day. But you at least gave us plenty of food for these kind of one-liners even for today. But we have many of other good contributors today as well, luckily. But thank you so much for now. And we'll have you back then this afternoon on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions and your interest, and look forward to seeing you in the afternoon.
Thank you. Then Inigo, please, you introduce our next session.
Yes, thank you, Herb. Thank you, Wilfred. That was a fantastic keynote speech and a very good start for the for this conference today, right? Thanks a lot. So I'm going to be now introducing the members of the first panel for the paper presentations. We've got three people intervening. And I'm gonna be maybe introducing them just before they speak, they intervene. The first one intervening, it's Nayara Garavide, which is connected, right? And I can't see you, but you're on the list, so hopefully works fine. Nayara, are you there? Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
Good
fantastic.
morning, everyone.
Good morning. So I'm going to introduce Nayara. She's a PhD student, a candidate at the University of Deusto here in Bilbao. And she holds a degree in English studies at the University of Salamanca, a very well-known university here in Spain and in Europe. And she also went through the Masters on Euroculture here in Deusto and the Göttingen and Göttingen University. And she's, as I said, a candidate for a PhD. Soon she's going to be finishing this PhD program in human rights, and currently have research in her thesis field. It's related with multinational corporations in Mercosur, in Latin America, right? So thanks a lot, Nayara. So uses the floor, and we calculated like a 10 minutes time to make your statement, your paper presentation, and then we will have the chance to receive maybe some questions on the chat or maybe some interventions afterwards. Okay, so thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Inigo. Should I share the screen? Is that fine? Yeah. Even if I'm young, I'm not very good at technology, so let's try this. You will let me know. Compartir pantalla. Oh, let's see. 1 second.